Here we go. All right. So the Moving the Needle on Connectivity in North Idaho webinar series aims to increase the knowledge and capacity of North Idaho communities on topics surrounding broadband. In previous webinars, we've heard about state resources for broadband from Eric Borsch at the Idaho Department of Commerce. And today we're going to continue that discussion on funding by talking about federal and local philanthropic resources for broadband and understanding the role of partnership. And as you can see here, we do have 2 more webinars left in this series. So we encourage you to register for all of them. If you weren't able to join us for the first 3, those are available online, and we'd be happy to share the links to that. And feel free to jump in and out at any time during the webinar series. We certainly hope you'll join us for the whole thing, but they're designed to stand alone as well. This workshop series is presented as part of the Rev Up North Idaho program. The Rev Up North Idaho program is funded through USDA Rural Community Development Initiative, as well as the Avista Fund at Innovia and local membership dollars from both Clearwater Economic Development Association and the Panhandle Area Council membership. If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. We do have a question and answer period towards the end. And we will also be taking questions for some of our speakers who have to leave early during the break at 9:35. So just go ahead and drop those in there. And with that, I think it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to my co-host today, Dorian Kombrick of the Panhandle Area Council.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, here I'm kind of sorting through things on my desktop. It's been kind of a messy morning. I'm Dorian Kombrick, and I am from the Panhandle Area Council. I am with the Panhandle Area Council. Basically, we represent the 5 northern counties of Idaho, and we are really glad that you're here today. If you've been with us since the first webinar in our series, you have been on a journey with us to learn about the broadband starting with Broadband 101, moving into broadband networks and business plans. And then most recently, we had an introduction to some of the amazing data resources that are available to assist you with broadband planning. That was a really fun session. Today's introduction to federal and local resources will hopefully allow you to start thinking about your current or future broadband projects and how you might be able to leverage these resources to see your broadband goals come to life. And as always, we'll hold our technical assistance session in a couple of weeks with these resources in mind to allow you to ask questions, discuss your thoughts and your ideas, and to go over the next exercise that NTIA BroadbandUSA will be providing with us at the end of today's webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce you all to our first presenter of the day. Mason Burley is here with us from the Innovia Foundation, and he is the Director of Research and Community Impact. Thank you for taking the time out of your day today to be with us, Mason.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Dorian. I'm joined today by Lynn Hunter from Philanthropy Northwest. Philanthropy Northwest represents six states, correct, Lynn? Throughout this area, and we've been working together to excuse me, educate funders in our region about the importance of broadband initiatives. And so, Dorian, am I able to share my screen, or
Angie, can he do that?
Or are the slides that I presented available?
I do have your slides on here, Mason. If you'd prefer to share your screen, certainly can, but I do have your PowerPoint here.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Angela. I guess I wanted to start off by kind of lowering the bar a little bit and setting proper expectations, because you might wonder why philanthropy is here in the first place. I don't have any technical expertise in telecommunications. Philanthropy, in most cases can't fund infrastructure for some of these projects. And to be honest, philanthropy is kind of new to this issue in terms of being a partner as well. And we are educating ourselves in a lot of ways. So I guess the question stands, why should we really be at the table in the first place? But I think it's important to hear about the role of philanthropy for a couple different reasons. The first is that we can be a community connector. on the next slide, we can, work with libraries, EDCs like yourself, public agencies, healthcare, institutions, education, business, to really have individuals in the community bring their time, talent, and treasure to the table. I mean, the community foundation that I work for, Innovia Foundation, has, we represent 10 counties in Eastern Washington, 10 in North Idaho, about 1 million people. And we have great connections with the nonprofit sector and public agencies as well. And so we kind of sit in the middle of that sector, as well as the, donors and private businesses that are really interested in investing in their community. What we hope to do is kind of build an ongoing conversation about the importance of broadband, because broadband isn't just an infrastructure issue. There's an access and infrastructure component, but also there's a digital equity. Closing the digital divide is important to us as well. And if people can't afford access to computers, or they need assistance, that's where we can help people become connected. And we really believe that vibrant and resilient communities are really anchored in the quality and diversity of connections, and that's what broadband in this our era right now is about connection. So we hope to bring people to the table. And how we're doing that on the next slide is at Innovia Foundation, at least we've developed some leadership councils, which are really trusted voices in each of those areas. They include business leaders, nonprofit leaders, elected officials that are kind of our ambassadors for philanthropy and for some of the initiatives of the foundation, as well as telling us about the important issues that go back to in your community that we can be a part of as well. And what we'd like to do is be able to kind of blend some of the expertise and community commitment from those leadership council members into some of the broadband action teams and community coalitions that are forming that you heard about from like Deborah Hansen. So on both sides of the border here that we serve, we really hope to elevate this issue and use our leadership councils to do that. The second way I think philanthropy can be evolved is finding co-funders. On the next slide, I think we have had success at helping to building and sustaining relationships, I think, and using those relationships to bring other funders to the table or to co-fund opportunities. And we can kind of tap that network to be part of that. In the Idaho side, I know my colleague Amy Voller, who's our North Idaho representative, she's on the call today. And when the Commerce, the CARES dollars funding that was tagged for broadband came out, she worked with multiple cities in North Idaho, including Burley, St. Mary's, Old Town, and Shoshone County, to kind of help make sure that if we could do anything to support applications, we would. And through Lynn and her partner network, we're also looking for other co-funders kind of for projects in our region and how to do it smartly. Lynn, feel free to jump in as well if you have additional comments. In the next slide, on one innovative way we're doing this is on the Washington side, but we have an organization that manages the Medicaid dollars in our state through the Medicaid Transformation Grant called Better Health Together. They work on some of the waiver funding in Washington state that's unique. And they've decided to allocate money towards broadband funding, and we're working to join with them to help support technical consultation, feasibility studies, and kind of federal grant writing support. So we're hoping to find similar partners in Idaho as well. And kind of once we build one of these examples in one area, it tends to blossom, I guess, into other areas. The third way that I think philanthropy can be involved is we oftentimes have, on the next slide, we have first mover advantage in a lot of cases. I think one of the reasons I like to be part of the foundation is we can break some rules. We certainly have accountability and responsibility, but it's to our donors and it's kind of to the charitable intent of the funds that they've established. And sometimes the intent of those funds is to act, not to ask, to innovate and to move in a ways that the community needs. So when we see kind of windows of opportunity, we are obliged to go through them. We're obliged to make things happen when we can. And on the next slide, one quick example of that, in Whitman County, they have a dark fiber line that they've been working on since 2015 or 16, maybe earlier, that goes from the south to north part of that county. And they're connecting this coming year 5 cities that you see there: Roselia, Oakdale, Tico, Garfield, and Palouse. And when COVID hit, we had an organization in Washington come to us called the organization is Rural Alliance, and they received some funding through the Balmer Foundation to help small communities get connected. And so Rural Alliance came to us and wanted to know in Eastern Washington if there was some ready projects to fund. And we reached out to our network and found that Pullman Regional Hospital was interested in expanding telehealth, and particularly they had a clinic ready to go in the town of Garfield. Garfield sits there right by the border, closer down, kind of between Pullman and Spokane, of course, but they're about population 600 individuals, 600 households. And so we were able to hire a consultant to help connect that clinic, work out the logistics, work out some other funding plans and operation plans to connect that clinic this year to telehealth. And I think it will be, something that grows, particularly for regional hospitals outside of metro areas, that they can connect to these small communities using online access. And I think they actually even bumped up Garfield's, since they knew this project was ready to go, I think they bumped them up in priority in terms of when they would get their fiber connection going. We're working on some other projects potentially to help with local financing methods and public utilities districts, seeing if that's an option. So we're trying to hire technical experts that maybe can help move some of these projects along, particularly in small areas where they can benefit for some outside expertise. And then I guess finally I'll just say, and Lynn, feel free, because I know that you have a lot, probably more stories about this, but I think philanthropy is committed for the long term. If there's anything this extended 2020 is now into 21 has taught us, that the future is definitely unclear. The economy may change, technology will definitely change, and our civic priorities will change as well. But I think, to me at least, it's clear that foundations are kind of in it for the long term, and we can help, be community advocates. So as some of these projects unfold, particularly in North Idaho, please come to us and we can at least have a conversation about how we can get involved in many of these ways. Lynn, feel free if you had anything to add.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know, Angela, did you want to, should I go ahead or did you want to stop for questions?
No, we can go ahead and move right into it. Here, let's see real quick. And yeah.
And I apologize, I do not have any slides. We had a big windstorm, as I'm sure you all had heard about it here in Seattle, where I'm based. And so I apologize for not having some slides ready available for you. But thank you, Mason, for setting me up here, because philanthropy is definitely committed for the long haul. Philanthropy Northwest serves as a convener to support shared learning and action throughout the 6 Northwest states, of which Idaho, thankfully, is one of them. We've been spending the last couple of months, actually, just we went to Innovia had hosted a convening of all their leadership councils at the beginning of the year in 2020, and we decided to go to that just to hear, what was going on locally in community. And what we heard loud and clear was that broadband definitely was at the top of the list there. And we not only heard it in Idaho, but in all of our other states as well. And so we covered the 6 Northwest states. So that's Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, Washington, and Wyoming. And my job is primarily to sort of hear about trends, right? To kind of understand if there are any trends that are kind of happening at the 6 states and kind of rising them up a little bit. And what are we hearing, and what is philanthropy's role in that? So we've been doing that for the last few months. And what was interesting to us is that we heard some bells around broadband ringing very softly. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and all of a sudden, all these education funders, health funders, and other folks, economic development folks were sort of like, wait a minute, we had assumed that everybody had broadband. Everyone was going to be able to connect virtually. And as we know, that is not the case. But at the same time, we're sort of like, where is philanthropy in the support of broadband, the build out of broadband, particularly for us in rural and communities of color throughout the 6 Northwest states there. So I wanted to just take a minute to kind of hit on the bigger themes that have been coming up as a region, right? So as a Northwest region, what we've been hearing, kind of the big holes that we've been seeing and what we've been learning, because I'll let you know too that our funders in the Northwest there are no broadband funders. There are no specific broadband funders in the Northwest, unfortunately. Like Mason said, we are late to the game on this, and we are very much realizing that. In the Northwest, we have a majority of education and health funders, with a smattering of community place-based funders like Innovia, where Mason is. And so we don't have folks who are specifically looking at broadband. So the question is then, well, then how would they support broadband? But here's some things that we have been learning and that we have been sort of testing out with our partners throughout the region. The first thing is that, as I'm sure you all know, after your big series that you've been undergoing, the internet access is a private market, right? It's based on density. So if there's no profit margin to be made, sort of in particularly rural areas, it is hard to attract companies to your place. They won't just build kind of out of the goodness of their heart. The second thing is that, and I hope I don't sound like sort of doom and gloom, but this is very much what we've been learning. A commercial approach is not working for rural and tribal communities and communities of color, and they will be left behind. And if no action is taken, then it may take much longer to catch up, if ever. And so that is something that is very much at the top of the minds of our funders out there. The third thing is that, again, it's hard to attract sort of these corporate dollars coming in, but there are cost-effective community-based alternatives, particularly tribal spectrum and community networks. And so there's a lot to be learned about how to set those things up, what that is, and I'll go into that a little bit further. The fourth thing is that funders have a role to play, but like I said before, there are no true sort of broadband funders. We know, as Mason had said, and I'm sure you all have know and will learn again today, is that private philanthropy really is a drop in the bucket compared to sort of the biggest funders at the table right now are federal and state dollars, particularly the federal stimulus dollars being released last year and we believe are going to be released again this year. Under that is that it will take a patchwork of many sort of health, education, and place-based funders, federal, state, local government, and community members to make this work in those areas where there's sort of no apparent commercial solution. The third thing there is that philanthropy has a role to play, like Mason was saying, as a connector and community capacity builder. What we've been discovering in our six states is that a lot of the players don't know each other. And so one of the opportunities that Philanthropy Northwest has is to really lean on our local community partners to say, hey, we're having a conversation around broadband. Would you please come and speak to them? Very much what the EDA is doing for us today. So that brings me to sort of Philanthropy Northwest two-pronged strategy. So we host a broadband interest group, which is grant makers coming together for action-oriented understanding of the roles that philanthropy can play to support communities, particularly again in tribal and communities of color. This group is open to grant-making organizations such as government offices, both federal and state and local, philanthropy, any kind of funder there, corporations, CDFIs, and we are doing that, like Mason was saying, in partnership with the Innovia Foundation. We had, I think, 4 or 5 sessions last year, and we are going to undergo another year-long worth of programming there. That conversation with the broadband interest group is held in parallel to our very specific tribal broadband learning community. This particular community, we call it T-Block, is a space for tribal communities specifically to come to learn together. They have monthly convenings that will include more technical trainings in partnership with the Internet Society, which if you guys are not familiar with the Internet Society, they have an abundance of really fantastic information about, again, those community networks that I was talking about and that taking advantage of the tribal broadband spectrum. So, you know, when I speak at these things, folks are always like, well, what should we do? You know, we're community members and we're kind of maybe on our journey about what broadband is and how to get it to our communities. What we've heard around the region, again, as we've been talking to all these experts, right, these people with really deep technical knowledge, is to use your networks. As a person in your community who is already engage even deeper. You know, express your intentions. Let folks know that your particular community, what your obstacles are, and find other voices in your community to help you kind of create that story. It's really important to find champions in your community who, you know, the person who is sort of the hub of the broadband activity. They don't need to be the expert, but it's sort of someone who can kind of express to other folks and other parties about what's going on in your locality so they can tell that story. What we've heard is that sometimes they're local business leaders or they're teachers, or sort of who is the natural fit, and like support that person, right? Sort of so when a funder does come in, they can be like, oh yeah, you know, talk to whoever, because they kind of know what's going on locally. Like they're kind of just the face of what's happening. Another thing that we've heard is to be open to new partnerships, but be very weary of easy solutions. Because there's money attached here, there are a lot of hacks out there. And I was trying to use that word lightly and find a good word for that. But, you know, just be very wary. And what we would suggest is which brings me to sort of my third takeaway, is to learn from others. Look at other communities who have already achieved what you've done, because it doesn't have to just be in Idaho, right? You can look way beyond. And a wonderful place to look is the Blandin Foundation. And I'll put their website in the chat here, but Blandin Foundation, BLANDIN, they're in rural Minnesota. They've been at this work of creating community networks in rural Minnesota for at least 10 years now. And they are incredible in how they are sharing what folks have been doing, you know, the vendors that they've been using, how their approaches basically from ground zero all the way up to something that's working. They've also shared conference sessions that they've had with community members, how to get a community network up and building, how to find your community partner, the questions that people are asking, just from soup to nuts is what my old boss used to say. So I will put that in the chat. Look also at other communities who have been successful. So in particular, for tribal communities, I know there's been a successful creation of these local ISPs in Colorado and in Hawaii. And the last piece of that is to look at the Internet Society. They have an incredible, as our friend there, Mark, likes to say, the Internet Society was actually created when the internet was created, in a way to get local trusted access to everybody on the planet. And so they are kind of the grand poobah, for lack of a better word, of sort of, you know, this sort of community network and what that is. And I'll put their information in the chat as well. But I think that's it for me. I don't know if we wanted to open it up to conversation there, or Mason, do you have any reflections on what I just shared?
No, that was great, Lynn. Certainly, we're trying to learn from places like the Blandin Foundation that have been doing this a lot longer than we have. So we look forward to working with it, you know, people in all these corners of our region. Appreciate it.
Andy, do you want us to let anybody ask questions? Because I believe, Lynn, you're going to be having to take off. Is that correct? Or do
I'll have to take off at 10, so I do have some time. Thank you for asking.
Angie, what do you prefer we do?
If there are some questions specifically for Lynn and Mason that you'd like to drop in the chat here, what we're actually going to do next is we have a little bit of a polling question just to kind of get everybody's brain a little bit energized. So as people are answering that, please do feel free to drop a question in the chat box and we'll have Lynn and Mason take those while they're still here. But one of the things that we wanted to encourage you to think about and to share your personal answer in the chat too is, as we've learned from our philanthropic partners here, a lot of times the funding for broadband is not specifically for broadband, but it maybe serves a larger mission in your community. So as you're thinking about your broadband projects that you're seeking this funding for, what does it enable in your community? What's the higher mission that you're trying to serve that broadband is the tool allowing you to access? And if you want to go ahead and drop those responses in the chat, no wrong answers, but we're curious to see what you guys come up with. Ooh, that's a good one. There's a really good answer already here. Closing the opportunity gap, enhancing emergency service capabilities, education, continuing education. So critical right now, especially. E-commerce, yes. Aren't we all doing so much more e-commerce now? And education for all, the broad range of education. Working, of course, aren't we all? We're all working online now, joining webinars. This is a great point. Education, remote workers in rural communities, the economy, the efficiency of business. That's a really interesting one. I like that language. Natural resource management through the Internet of Things. Now that's an interesting one. Thank you for sharing that, Wendelin.
Mm-hmm.
And before we move on here, I do just want to give Mason a quick opportunity here. I know you have actually a grant program open right now, the Community Strategies Program. Is that correct, Mason? Open until next Friday?
Yes, thank you, Angela. I was thinking that as well. We have a community grants round that is open right now, and certainly efforts, and I've already talked to some groups, but efforts like a broadband action team through a nonprofit or community organization like a library or an EDC would be eligible. I mean, we recognize the value of those kind of conversations and what they can enable in the communities. So please apply to Innovia.org or contact me. I'll put my email in chat as well if you have any questions.
That's fantastic. And for both you and Lynn, if a community has a project that they're not quite sure might be a fit for your funding or not, and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to go about doing that? Is there a particular contact on your website that you'd like them to use, or?
Yeah, I think, folks are always welcome to contact me. To be very transparent, what we do is we would get a information, request or whatnot from someone, but we would immediately go to someone like Mason over at Innovia because he has local knowledge, particularly through all of his leadership councils. And so what we would do is say, hey, Mason, what do you think about this? What kind of conversation might we be able to have and things like that. So I think Mason and I both sort of tag team with each other and our partners locally as much as we can.
Fantastic.
I wanted to just mention one thing, and that is Lynn mentioned that there's very little broadband funding in the philanthropic world. And at NTIA, we're blessed that, as Scott will mentioned, we just recently got some recent broadband funding, which he's going to talk about. But a few years ago when we started working on interagency funding, we were very aware that many of our peer agencies didn't have broadband funding. Most of the funding was only a pot of money at the FCC and some limited funding at USDA. But we felt that the need for broadband was much broader. And so one of the things that we worked with all of our federal partners on was what we called eligible use. And so what we tried to do was we really tried to make it we tried to work with all of our partner agencies to try to say, well, is broadband an eligible element in the housing funding? You know, is broadband an eligible element, you know, in this part of your education? Is broadband an eligible element in the rights of way? You know, where is it eligible? And we worked agency after agency to ask everybody to clarify their rules and to say, well, where is it eligible? And each one of those wins was small, but I consider it the stone soup of broadband. You know, if you get a little bit in a lot of places, you end up with a very good soup. And,
Yeah.
I would kind of say that, you know, philanthropically, that could be a huge win across all of those agencies, because we see that in our federal agencies as well, that as more and more of those agencies realize they can't deliver services without the infrastructure, the computers, or the digital training, if those programs can provide a little training, a few computers, a little infrastructure, every single one of those programs, philanthropically or government-wise, that can do a little bit more, that can make it an eligible expense, that every time you can make it an eligible expense programmatically, government-wise, federal, state, or philanthropically, stone soup.
Absolutely. I think Karen's message is absolutely right on the money there, no pun intended, but it's very much a stone soup of what's going on. And it's a web of relationships, because what we're finding in philanthropy is that many times the federal agencies or state agencies have a gob of money to be dispersing, and they rely on local partnerships. So they often come to philanthropy to say, hey, do you know these folks here? Do you know these folks here? Can you help us connect? You know, so we're often working as sort of like a broker, to say, oh yeah, we know them. Here's all the work that we've done with them before. We know this about this community and whatnot. And so it's very much them working hand in hand in terms of the local knowledge and local connections, and sort of helping that the bigger drops of money, so the federal and state and municipal dollars, to come through. And so we're working hand in hand with folks, and we're getting to know each other too. I'm not going to lie about that, but it's very much what can you bring to the table? So this whole stone soup concept that Karen was talking about, of everyone kind of coming together to say, there is a huge need here. Nobody can do it on their own. And so how do we start to leverage each other and connect with each other in really different ways, so that we can all support these vibrant communities? That is really where we want to all go. But the speed in which the money is coming out, and the inefficiencies that come along with that are becoming more and more apparent, I think, as we're working in this space. And so we are trying to, you know, really focus in on community, and where are the energy sources, energy sources in the community, and how do we start to lift and leverage them and learn from each other as well as we go along. But you're right on the money there, Karen, with that stone soup concept.
Well, the need for that community space is going to become even more important as we roll out our new programs, and I think Scott will tell you about them. I think we have another introduction coming up, so I'm going to hand it back to Sita.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think this is such a valuable discussion. I'm excited to see where it goes even beyond today. So thank you, Lynn and Mason. And we're certainly looking forward to adding that to our pot of stone soup here in North Idaho. And with that, as Karen mentioned,
we have a quick question, Angie.
Yes.
Are there any examples of community planning documents, action planning for implementation when funding is available, that's beyond the networking?
Yes, let me take a look. I know the Washington State has done a pretty good, I don't know if it's available publicly for those community planning documents, but let me take a look real quick as I know, and I know that the Blandon Foundation also too has some archived sort of documents about how folks have really done their planning. And so let me see if I can dig something up there, but if I can't, I'll put those websites up just so you can take a look yourselves. Thank you.
And Angie, should I go ahead and introduce Scott as our next speaker?
Yes, I
All
think
right.
we're ready.
Okay, so as I said, our next speaker is Mr. Scott Woods, who's going to be telling us about NTIA's grant program, the FCC's Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF as it's called, as well as some other FCC resources. And Scott is the Senior Communications Program Specialist with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration BroadbandUSA initiative. And he is the principal liaison between the BroadbandUSA program office and key strategic partners and external stakeholder groups, including representatives from state and local governments, telecommunications companies, for and nonprofits, and colleges and universities. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Morehouse College, a Master of Arts in Public Policy from American University, and a Juris Doctor from Howard University School of Law. As always, thank you for being here with us today, Scott.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I know the folks have seen me before, as well as my partner in crime, Karen Perry, as we continue our work to build capacity, as well as our federal partners. I want to start off before we begin, just by thanking Lynn and Mason for joining us today. And I think they've highlighted a real area of partnership that we have with Philanthropy, as well with CETA and PAC. And that's the ability to really build capacity and technical assistance for communities on the front end from programs that won't be covered or can't be covered, or expenses that won't be covered by the next set of programs that you'll hear from federal sources. It's really important, from grant writing, from money for feasibility studies, for planning, and all of that organization work that comes on the front end. It's really good to know that communities have those partnerships available, both from the philanthropic source as well as CETA and PAC's work. So thank you very much. So I'm going to begin. I'm going to kick this off because when we originally planned this workshop series, we didn't have any money. We had a ton of ideas. We had a ton of community-based technical assistance that we were offering. And then in typical federal government fashion, in the stroke of a pen, if you will, we all of a sudden have a $1.5 billion grant program that I, among others, are responsible for setting up. So I'm going to briefly talk about, in this section, of the Title IX Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. And that really establishes, like I said, about almost $1.6 billion in new grant programs to be administered by NTIA, as well as some codification of what we were doing under BroadbandUSA. It's now called the Access Broadband Act, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But for the folks here, probably most impactful and most important is the new grant programs that we'll be rolling out here in a very short time window. One, we'll have $1 billion for tribal broadband connectivity grants. We have $300 million to support broadband infrastructure deployment grants, and about $285 million to set up a Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. This also will be a grant program. And as Lynn and Mason talked about, and Lynn highlighted in her remarks, these areas really have been impacted and exacerbated by COVID-19. There's really a drastic need for tribal connectivity as tribal communities have been really devastated by COVID-19. As well as we all know about the infrastructure in rural communities and other communities that really need to really step up their broadband infrastructure, both on the middle mile and a last mile basis. And then the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program will be targeted for HBCUs, minority serving institutions, as well as tribal colleges and universities, to enhance their access and connectivity for devices and connectivity for students. And then within a 15-mile radius, those communities that those schools are located in, to really address connectivity and access and training for those communities as well. So these are entirely new grant programs. We're starting from scratch. Luckily, from the prior administration, the team and I were instrumental in setting up the BTOP program. So we have this infrastructure, we have the institutional knowledge to be able to do this, but this is new money with some new requirements and some new specificity. I want to highlight one, particularly with the broadband infrastructure program. We have priority, we will, by statutory language, to prioritize those connections that are at least 100 megabits download and 20 megabits upload. So that, really sets a priority standard for us as we move forward. Again, not saying that we won't consider programs or projects below that threshold, but by legislation, by statutory authority, we have to give priority to those projects that target that threshold speed. All of these programs we are developing the rules for, we have to do within a 60-day period. And so there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes to get this kicked off and running. Another aspect of what we have has been codified under the Act is a new office, Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. This codifies really everything that we were doing under BroadbandUSA, just codifies that now as a mandate under the NTIA office. So we will establish our Access Broadband Office, the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. And then we have really specific obligations now and mandates to track federal dollars by our federal partners. So you'll hear a little bit later from USDA, EDA, FCC. Now we'll be in charge of kind of coordinating and tracking where those federal dollars have been spent in the community. And then again, with our grant program, we can target unserved and underserved communities to fill in the gaps for broadband infrastructure, both on the last mile and middle mile basis. We have an obligation to streamline all of the various application processes and then coordination of broadband support. So it is a lot. Outside of the time that I have with you today, I have a significant number of meetings, just devoted to developing and getting feedback from our outreach efforts, from the philanthropic community, from our federal government partners, as well as those in the industry. And we're working to get this kicked off in about 60 days or so. So you will have more information from us as we move forward. But again, we look forward to partnering with both philanthropic, our federal partners, as well as EDA and CETA and PAC, and making sure that we get this information out and we can process these applications and make these awards in a timely basis. I have to say, we have to do this in FY21. So we don't have a 10-year window to get this. We've got to get this done now. Next slide, please. So it really aligns with what we're doing already under BroadbandUSA. As you all know and recall, we're a one-stop shop for federal funding information. And so through our existing coordination work, our federal coordination work, we work with all of the entities, as Karen gave you a highlight of entities that provide money for broadband. We were very influential in making sure that they include funding for broadband. But then as an offshoot of that, we have on our website, you can get all of the up-to-date information on the eligibility criteria, the amounts, what it can be used for. All of that information is housed in one-stop shop, if you will, on our website. So we have a link down there. You can fund, you can search by type, you can search by area, and it gives you all the up-to-date information on that. I wanted to highlight specifically, if those of you who had questions about the FCC's programs. FCC tends to give most of its funding specifically to carriers under its ETC rules, the eligible telecommunication carrier rules. We can go into more detail about the FCC's programs in your individual technical assistance sessions. But if you want just a really good overview of all of the various funding sources, including the FCC, you can go to our site and we give all that information for you. Next slide, please. We're also, for the carriers and for the providers, we're a one-stop shop for federal permitting information. So again, as part of our interagency collaboration, we gather a ton of information about the federal permitting process, how to navigate, how to streamline those rules, particularly with major federal land management agencies, as you can see here. So if a provider wanted to, again, build a network or expand existing services, we've made that process easier to the extent they have to traverse or it impacts federal land. And so we do all that through our federal coordination efforts. Next slide, please. As you heard before in our previous session, we had Eric Forsch with the Idaho Broadband Task Force there. He is a part of our multi-stakeholder group that we also manage out of NTIA. It's really a one-stop shop for all of the state broadband programs. Right now, we have all 50 state broadband directors and 6 territories involved in this multi-stakeholder effort. And we've collaborated and we have all of that information in one site where you can just click on, for example, Idaho, and get all of the relevant information that's available for your state broadband plan if you don't already have those contacts. Excuse me. And again, you can also see, as Lynn mentioned, the benefit of sometimes looking at what other states are doing. You can click and see other states that may have even expansive resources or broadband grant programs or support programs that you can link to and see and even borrow from, because this group comes together once a month. They share best practices, they share lessons learned. We're working with them on the rollout of these grant programs and making sure that we get their insights and recommendations. So this is definitely a collaborative approach as we move forward. But this is, resources that are available to you right now. Next slide, please. And I'm really excited about our national broadband availability map. I've talked to you guys about that before, but this is our multi-year program to really improve on a granular level where broadband is and where it is not. We all understand the fallacy of some of the existing mapping programs, for example, with the FCC and some of the other mapping protocols that are out there. But our effort utilizes that information, but we really have really specific information that we use in our map program. And our map program will be essential in the programmatic oversight and of our applications and how we process and how we provide oversight and make decisions of the grant program. So I like to say, and I used this analogy before, the FCC collects information from the carriers, right? It's generally collected on their Form 77 data. It's about advertised speeds, right? We all know the fallacy in their data collection. We don't have to down the FCC for that. We include that data, but they include just that one source of data. Our MBAM right now has 2.5 terabytes of data, and it can be granularized almost to 100 square meter level if we're using speed test data from Ookla and MLabs, but we also have data from other federal agencies and partners of the American Community Survey, custom state data sets. So if you were in one of our sessions before, we were talking to Eric Forsch about being a part of the MBAM. If there's Idaho specific data that the state has, that would be included in the MBAM, and the federal and state policymakers would have access to that state specific data as part of their overall access to MBAM. I do want to highlight, however, this is not available to communities. This is a tool for federal and state policymakers. We're talking now about maybe some version in the future that's available for the community, but for now it's going to be limited exclusively to federal policymakers, USDA, EDA, our members, as well as states and their broadband offices. So, but we're working to improve that. Next slide, please. We'll talk really briefly, again, part of the Idaho sessions, if you will, is a part of our greater Broadband USA technical assistance offering. We really do work in 3 buckets. From a partnership standpoint, we work with communities, we work with federal and state agencies, as I highlighted before. We clarify policy. Again, like I said, we have a multi-stakeholder group for state broadband leaders, the SBLN. We have one now for Digital Inclusion Leaders Network, the DLIN, where we bring together all of those thought leaders, again, to share practices, improve coordination. For those of you who are in that space and need that assistance, we have that information for you. Again, technical assistance, as you see here, we work directly with communities. We work with entities like CETA and PAC to really, address infrastructure needs, digital inclusion, smart technology, and the like. And then as we're building out our website and our guides and our tools, we also share best practices. We have a number of different how-to guides on our website that we're constantly updating. I just talked to you about the National Broadband Availability Map. And then events like this, we convene stakeholders, we have webinars and events, and we really try to establish an open dialogue between all of the various entities that are involved in broadband access and digital inclusion and digital equity. Next slide, please. One of the things that you will really be interested in, and I want to highlight, we conduct a monthly webinar that's national. We bring together thought leaders across the country, and for 60 minutes, we talk about and present issues that are germane to broadband and digital inclusion, those issues that are ripe for discussion for the day or for the moment. I want to highlight what we're doing next week. Our very own Karen Archer-Perry is going to moderate a discussion on using data as a foundation for broadband planning. And we're going to highlight sort of the data collection efforts of MLab and UCLA as their programs are designed to really capture real live, real-time end user data about where the speeds that customers and consumers and businesses actually get versus what's reported, for example, on the 477 data. So you sign up for our monthly webinar series, you'll get an email blast, you'll get a sign up screen. We do it, once a month for 11 months out of the year. We generally take December off. Again, we're taking January off because the day that we would do it in January is actually inauguration. So we're going to push that back to February. So please sign up and join us. Again, it's just an opportunity to learn, ask questions, and we're just compiling information to help you and make your job easier as you determine your own broadband infrastructure plans and projects and partnerships. Next slide, please. So again, you can contact us directly and we'll put this information in the chat. You can submit a technical assistance form if you like, but you can contact myself, you can contact Karen Perry directly, or for any digital inclusion assistance, you can contact Emmy Sang. And again, she has our next broadband workshop series coming up about using digital inclusion adoption as a foundation for sustainability of any broadband project. But again, you can contact us. You can visit our website for any additional information. We have a speed simulator chart that you can, if you really had an idea, don't have a real good idea or understanding of, the impact on productivity of speed, we have a speed simulator chart and that you can example that you can run through that really shows the differences of speeds, and you can, again, look at that from a productivity standpoint and just imagine how much better certain, routine activities would be at different speed levels. So we use that, with communities to really, help them see the difference between, broadband speeds on productivity. With that said, I'm going to turn back to Sita, Angie, but we have really good speakers coming up. I think we're about to take a break, but we have really good speakers coming up on USDA and EDA, our federal partners that we work with that support us on these broadband workshops. They have a wealth of information and funding as well that's available. So I really appreciate the time to be with you today, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that great overview, Scott. And it's so exciting to hear about all the new funding coming our way. So as Scott mentioned, we are at a time for a 5-minute break. I think since we're a little bit behind on time, we might shorten that up and try and go with about a 2 to 3 minute break if that works for our next speakers. But if there are any questions that have come up to this point or discussion topics that you really want to hit on, feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll try and reconvene here in about 2 minutes.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to be hopping off now, but really appreciate the opportunity and the information.
Yeah, we so appreciate you, Lynn. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, Lynn, before you leave, I will reach out to you. We're right now conducting outreach and listening sessions, so I would love to schedule one with Philanthropy Northwest, so I'll be in contact. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott and Angela. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. If we're ready to get started here again, I'll give it about 30 seconds for everybody to get back in front of their screens, and then we'll move into speaking with John Holman with USDA Rural Development. And let's see here. Okay. So John Holman is the General Field Rep for Rural Utilities Service covering Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. John is a veteran of the Navy and recently transitioned to rural utilities from USDA Rural Development, where he was Energy Coordinator for Renewable Energy with 20 years of federal service. He is excited to help navigate federal telecommunication programs to build and to expand broadband networks. Thank you so much for being here with us today, John, and I'll go ahead and turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Angela. I really do appreciate it, and everybody for joining today. Real quickly, do you have my PowerPoint, or should I bring that up to the screen?
I do have your PowerPoint, so if you just let me go ahead. Everybody wants to go ahead and mute themselves if you're in the background. All right, there we go. But yes, John, I do have your PowerPoint, so just let me know when you want me to flip those slides.
John, don't you mute yourself. John, you'll have to unmute.
Sorry about that. My name is John Holman. I'm the General Field Rep for the Rural Utility Service. As Scott had mentioned, there is a significant amount of funds through the FCC, but our programs do have some funding as well. Our programs are geared to rural communities. We also have Tim O'Connell, which is our Western Regional Coordinator, who is a good point of contact for a number of programs that we have through rural development. Next slide, please. Under the canvas of USDA, there's multiple agencies. One of those that many of you may be familiar with is rural development. Its primary focus is economic development for our rural communities. We have a number of programs there that provide either loans, grants, or guarantees to lenders. We have some water and electric programs, business programs, but we kind of, as RUS works closely with rural development, have telecommunication programs, of which I'm going to cover to hopefully gain some interest to start those discussions. Next slide, please. So to give you some idea of the history of the Rural Utility Service, it was created through the Rural Electrification Act in 1935. It started to receive some authority to provide telephone services to our rural communities around late 1940s. And only as of recently, since 1995, have we started to finance broadband. And from 2010 to present, our agency has provided about $7 billion in assistance for both loans and grants for broadband infrastructure. Next slide, please. So with the Rural Utility Service telecommunication programs, we actually have 4 core programs and 1 pilot program. Under our core programs, we have an infrastructure loan program, which is really an opportunity because that is where the funding is available. We have a significant amount of dollars through the infrastructure loan program. We work with telephone companies and incumbent local exchange carriers who are looking to either make improvements to their existing exchange or expansion to rural communities. We also have a broadband access loan program that's really not being utilized. We're currently rewriting some regulation for a new rural broadband program, so look forward to details to that. Next slide, please. So through our infrastructure program, we have approximately about $690 million available every fiscal year. This is on a national level. We don't even come close to spending any of those dollars. And as you can see there, to some of the updates, really not much of those loans have been made in the Pacific Northwest. I think there are a number of reasons for not spending those dollars. One is that it's kind of overshadowed by a pilot program that we have right now. It's kind of unique in that we really support our rural communities with populations of 5,000 or less. There is some eligibility as regards to the program for non-duplication. So, but just to let you know that we have this program available and be happy to explore the opportunity for an infrastructure loan. Next slide, please. So with the infrastructure program, there are some real benefits to it. One is that it's at the cost of money. We have the ability to work with the Federal Financing Bank or the Rural Telephone Bank. Right now, those interest rates are extremely low. We do have the ability to defer a loan for a couple years to allow the borrower to build out their network to start generating revenues to meet expenses. And we do provide those loans at the economic life as regards to the amortization plus 3 years. So we extend that amortization out so that we can make sure that they have the ability to repay over a period of time. So there's some real benefits to that program. Next slide, please. I won't talk much about broadband access. We've had some funding available, but currently not being utilized. Look forward to some updates. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have a pilot program called Reconnect. The Secretary of Agriculture created a list of priorities for the entire U.S. Department of Agriculture, and priority number 1 is e-connectivity. And because of that, we have a pilot program with some significant level of funding. Next slide, please. So the way that this pilot program was rolled out was in phases. The program was based upon a Consolidation Appropriations Act. Phase 1, we had about $600 million in available funding. Phase 2, an additional $550 million. Both of those phases have already gone through. Phase 2, for the $550 million, we did a lot of significant dollars in the state of Idaho. Approximately 43 million of that 550 million went to Idaho, mostly to do with a lot of telephone companies and service providers being familiar with our programs and some opportunity there. But we look forward to an increase in funding through Reconnect for fiscal year 21, a significant increase. So we're looking for some more projects. There are some program rules around the program to which we provide funding for build out of broadband networks to areas that don't have sufficient access, defined by 10-to-1, 10 megabits download, 1 megabit upload. We do have some build out requirements of 25/3. Most of the projects we see for Reconnect are fiber. So we're meeting those build out requirements, but we are technologically agnostic to where we look at multiple technologies, as is mostly the case for a lot of areas in Eastern Washington and Idaho that may have some different applications of technology such as fixed wireless and so forth. But we anticipate a good level of program funding. Being that it's a pilot program, it has to be codified within 2 years. So we're looking for new regulation on the program for fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So as regards to who can apply, now it's pretty broad to the applicant who can come in for funding through our programs. We're starting to see a lot more with municipalities, cities and local governments who are looking to own and operate broadband networks. If you were to contact our agency, this is the first thing that I'd like to talk with you about as regards to ownership. Who's going to own the broadband network? And there might be some partnerships that will be involved. We just want to make sure that we checkbox eligibility of who is the applicant to make sure that they are not one removed from the actual project, since they would be receiving loan or grant. Next slide, please. We do take quite a review on these projects for both technical and financial feasibility. There are some other eligibility factors. In the interest of time, I won't get too much into detail on that. But as I work with you on a potential project, I'll start to cover certain areas to make sure that your project has good priority selection for funding. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So with our Reconnect pilot program, you can either come in for a loan grant combination, or grant only. The difference between those is that grant is always competitive. Loan dollars are available and not as competitive. So if you're looking for grant only, keep in mind that it is competitive scoring and usually broken down to the level of funding that's available. There is a match requirement for grant dollars of 25% where there is no match for loan. Next slide, please. We've had, as I already mentioned, we've had some funding rounds, and keep in mind that we're looking forward to a good level of funding for fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. So we have two other true grant programs. One is Community Connect Grant. This is a small grant opportunity for projects of $3 million or less. We've currently had that program closed for this fiscal year, so we'll have to look to fiscal year 22 for new potential projects. I've been working with Eric Forsch at the Department of Commerce on trying to get awareness out on this program for Idaho. It's a real opportunity. We also have a distance learning and telemedicine grant. That is a grant up to $1 million per project for equipment to do just those things, distance learning or telemedicine. So it is a true telecommunication program, and it really is the equipment for distance learning telemedicine to communicate between different sites. For the state of Idaho, we recently awarded Idaho Primary Care Association some grant dollars for equipment to do just those things for telemedicine. But that's a real opportunity. We look forward to a significant increase in funding for fiscal year 21 on distance learning telemedicine. Next slide, please. Community Connect, we've had about 33 million available every fiscal year. This year we have an increase of funding plus some carryover. Not much activity in Idaho. Over the past 10 years, only $389,000 for Community Connect. So it's not being utilized in Idaho or Washington, and nothing in Oregon in the past 10 years. So we're starting to get the word out on this program, and I'd like to work with any of you that are looking for a Community Connect grant. Next slide, please. Distance learning telemedicine, we've had historically about 25 million every fiscal year. Last year, we've had 71 million available, but we did not realize due to the COVID-19 situation how much interest we're going to get in this program now that everybody needs equipment to do these things. So we were well oversubscribed. We received in excess of 540 million in applications for 71 million available. So it was extremely competitive. For those that applied in the state of Idaho or Washington, I'm working with them to see if not selected for funding for the next fiscal year. We anticipate another good level of funding for this program as well. There is a 15% match requirement, which is pretty nominal for a grant program. But just keep in mind that distance learning telemedicine is a grant opportunity that is available through RUS. Next slide, please. Next slide. So to give you some idea as regards to the level of funding through our programs, about 7.6 billion since fiscal year 2010 through RUS Telecom. Our infrastructure program, 3 billion. Reconnect program there is starting to gain some speed as regards to the numbers. Look for those numbers to significantly increase. We had, for a period of time, a broadband initiatives program, BIP. I'm not too familiar with that program, but we did provide some funding in Idaho for our BIP program, but that's no longer available. And then Community Connect grants at 185 million, just to give you some ideas of the level of funding. Next slide, please. So here's Idaho, 90 million. So our infrastructure program has worked quite well in Idaho, 43 million. Reconnect program, that number is a lot higher. So it's about 55 million at this point. Distance learning, 2.8 million, and not much for Community Connect, 389,000, which is surprising. It's a real true grant program for 3 million or less. And then our BIP program provided 13 million. Next slide. So all states for tribal investments, I would like to make mention that there is some opportunity for tribes, if they are in substantially underserved trust areas, to receive priority under these programs. Our agency makes a great effort to work with tribal entities, tribal lands, Alaskan Natives, and so forth on projects. So if you have a tribal entity who's looking to build out broadband or make some improvements to their current infrastructure, we're happy to help. Next slide, please. So here is our contact information. I cover the states of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. I've always find that projects that are successful are those folks that contact our agency early, to be in those conversations early, so that when those funding opportunity announcements come up, they will align with project timelines. And when those announcements come through the Federal Register, there's only a period of about 90 days, mostly for true grant programs to apply. There is quite a heavy lift for our Reconnect pilot program. I'm happy to help you navigate those federal application process. There is a contact there for Tim O'Connell. I'd like to see if I can give Tim a couple of minutes. He is really kind of focused on rural development activities and community engagement, and have him talk a little bit about a memorandum of understanding between agencies that's making funding available for broadband.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just real quick, just to continue what John said, we do have other funding programs within USDA Rural Development. We cover the whole gamut, utilities, business development, housing. But one of the exciting provisions in the last Farm Bill is that it's a smart grid authority that gives the Secretary of Agriculture the ability to use up to 10% of some of our other federal programs for broadband purposes. So for example, if a community comes in, like a hospital for a purchase or redoing a clinic or library, up to 10% of those funds can be used for a broadband project for that essential community facility, as well as a small business through our Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan. So there is a wide variety of funding available for broadband projects, in addition to the main programs that John covered. So he or I would be the point of contact for additional information on that. And of course, with the programming that John mentioned, it's sometimes it's not the easiest to access. So like John mentioned, contact us early and often for your project. And one of the things that kind of embarked me on this journey was just the capacity building that's needed for applying for these programs. And that's kind of where I've been focusing some of my activities on helping rural communities that with the capacity to not only access the programs, but it's the, once you get the funding, it's the build out, the maintenance, and the ongoing operations. So there's a lot of activities going on in that area, and just appreciate the opportunity to be working with Northern Idaho and other communities in trying to solve the digital divide. So that's kind of a real quick summary. I know that we're getting short on time, so I'm going to pass it back over to the organizers or to John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Just real quickly, I saw a couple questions in the chat. If I could just really address a couple of those. Our programs are really designed to provide funding to build out broadband networks to areas where there isn't good connectivity. And that threshold of 10.1 is really a requirement, the due diligence an applicant needs to make up front. I do not know at this point if that requirement is going to change to 25.3. But really, the difference between USDA, RUS, and FCC programs is that RUS relies on public notice responses as regards to validating that level of service. The FCC relies on provider data. So that's always something to be put into the conversation early. And it's really about how you carve out of a total capital investment the area to which you're looking to build out your network. So perhaps maybe there is a way to draw those lines on a map to identify that area that would be potentially eligible. And that's part of the discussion you'd have with us when you initially contact us. And of course, NTIA is a tremendous resource as regards to that and getting that information and the planning and the technical assistance behind it. So thank you very much. And back to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, John. And I saw that Jerry Miller actually had a really interesting comment in there that I want to remember to circle back around on after Francis's presentation. So Jerry, if you can remember your comment about tax credits and combining those, I think we'll get to that in a minute. But Dorian, if you'd like to introduce our final speaker.
I would love to do that. And a big thank you again, John. Thank you for being here today to present this information to us. We really appreciate you and Tim being here for this. Our next speaker today is Frances Sakaguchi from EDA. She is the Regional Economic Development Integrator for the Economic Development Administration. She's worked for multiple federal agencies, nonprofits, institutions of higher education, and in the private sector throughout the Western states. And she currently works out of the EDA Seattle Regional Office overseeing 8 states. Thank you for being here, Frances. We're excited to listen to what you have to say.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me? No.
I think so. I think you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yes.
You can hear me. Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks to both CETA and Panhandle for pulling this together and hosting this. I know we're really running late here, and I talk fast, and I'll see if I can talk even faster. So you can go to the next slide, please, and we'll start this. I don't have control of the slide. There we go. Okay, so just real quick, for those who don't know, EDA, we are a small agency in the Department of Commerce. All of our federal partners and that were on this line that you heard, they work in economic development in various ways. That might not be their entire forte, but EDA, that is our lead mission. We are the only agency that focuses on economic development. The way that we do that basically is through our grant programs. We are a funding agency. Our purpose is to create jobs, retain jobs, and build economic capacity. And we help communities do that through our funding programs. But I realize this is a lot larger that's coming across on here. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So our programs are not broadband specific at all. Broadband is just something that we can support. And these are some of our programs at the regional level. Just go over real quick on the planning partnership, and that is supporting a lot of our economic development districts, actually all of our economic development districts. We do have a small pot in local technical assistance, economic adjustment. A lot of the broadband projects that come in tend to fall under that. And in there, we also put our disaster fundings. Most recently, the CARES Act fund fell in under that. We do have one revolving loan fund program for small businesses. And then Public Works is our largest funding program, where it's a bricks and mortars program that supports that type of work. Again, I'm going to just go briefly through those. So down at the bottom, you see the websites that will have the further information on those programs. Next slide, please. Just quick on eligibility. Again, this is the federal funding. Most of these are grant programs. So the eligibility in terms of being a public entity, either or a recognized tribe, an institute of higher education, or a nonprofit organization. We do require a planning document as well. Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, as SPEDS, that is one of our planning documents that will support any type of EDA funding. However, there could be equivalent planning documents to that. The whole purpose on that is that we want to make sure the project that is being submitted for funding is supported by the community. And then there's other things in terms of various government type of documentation. Again, I'm not going to go into any of that. We do have a match requirement, and that is going to be based on a distress level of a community. It can go from 1 to 1, or starting at 1 to 1, and then it can go in terms of lower match, again, depending on distress level. Next slide, please. Again, we are not specific in terms of funding broadband. What was highlighted really because of the pandemic, and the previous speakers had definitely talked about that, and all of you out there realize that it really, the pandemic magnified the importance of broadband. So whether that is to keep businesses operating as they find alternative ways to do business, whether it's working from home, there's the telehealth factor, teleeducation. I mean, it definitely broadband, the importance of the pandemic magnified the importance of broadband in terms of keeping the economic activity going and keeping communities viable. We had our CARES Act fund, and we're hoping that is pretty much gone at this point, and we're hoping that the new administration and there'll be some other stimulus funding coming in. And the one thing that was specific to that, again, because we are not our funding is not specific to broadband, but for any of the projects that it had to be associated with the pandemic. So we shall cross our fingers and see if we get additional funding that can fall into that line. Next slide, please. I was asked specifically to show examples of what EDA can fund, and again, as not being with our agency funding economic development and not specific, none of the programs are specific to broadband. I pulled out these various projects that had broadband components or that were supporting broadband activities. On the non-construction end, we had a few planning types of grant support. I don't have anything in Idaho, unfortunately, but this is one of the most recent, and it's to a COG back east in North Carolina, and it was basically to support a broadband aggregation study. And you can see some of the scope items there. A lot of it in regards to planning and assessment. Okay, next slide, please. And then, and I'm sorry, I didn't have a dollar amount on the previous one. And the dollar amounts, I'm pulling these from announcements that are on our website. So I'm hoping that those dollar amounts are accurate. So don't hold me to that. I'm taking this from other information on that, but because I know those can change sometimes. Again, not in our region. We had another example of a broadband, and this came under the economic adjustment funding. We have a special initiative in regards to our COES funding, but this one also supporting a broadband study, a fairly large area. It covered 11 counties, a lot of need analysis here, some mapping work as well. Then the study, the project below that, again, back east, much smaller amount. Another broadband assessment type study, again, more or less non-construction planning type study. Then next slide, please. These are more in terms of the first one being to the Telluride Foundation in Colorado. This was an equipment purchase. Again, this came under our economic adjustment program, but it shows you the type of funding that EDA can support. So again, this is the equipment purchase of fiber strands. Then we have a couple of public works types of support, public works funding support for broadband projects. One to St. Joseph County in Indiana. So that actually was broadband infrastructure. And then the last one below that was also public works money, smaller public works money, which is supporting installation of fiber optic cable to some of the business areas within the cooperative. Next slide, please. And this one I wanted to include because, again, with EDA not being an agency that has specific broadband programs, this is something that these are the kind of projects that we can support where, in this case, this is more or less development of a new business park. But within that business park, what they came to for EDA was assistance in terms of building out the infrastructure. And that infrastructure included the fiber optic services for broadband. So not coming in as a broadband project, coming in as a business development type of project with infrastructure, which included broadband. So a lot of these are types of projects that EDA can support, not broadband specific, but in a piece of the larger picture. Okay, next slide, please. And by the way, that was the public works funding. The work that I do is next slide, called the integration. And as you were hearing all day today, that these various partners, be it the federal agencies, be it the philanthropic types of partners, we help each other, and by being able to leverage resources, not just funding, but by doing things such as the federal forums, we have listening sessions, being able to support each other on the technical side as well as on the partnership side. That helps us help the communities be able to either reach further out in terms of finding what type of resources are there, or just to have some supportive type of examples, documents, just different type or a network as well. Next slide, please. This is just actually I stole the slide because this actually shows the visual of that type of integration and what we do. I mean, we increase by doing the integration work, by doing that network and that collaboration, that partnership, it increased access to other resources. So we're enhancing the collaboration effort of that, and it reduces the burden on the applicant and on the community. And by having being able to come to us to be able to do this integration type of work. Then putting that into practice a little bit, next slide. These are two examples of projects where EDA, we came in on the early end and we assisted in terms of developing or supporting it and being able to develop the planning side of a broadband project. So our pot of money was fairly small. And the first one is in New York with the Seneca Nation. But being able to develop that with our EDA support, the Seneca Nation was able to get funding from USDA for development under their Reconnect program. The second example here is the city of John Day. And John Day, this one I was involved with. John Day was very much, they had a vision of the need of a rural, being able to develop out the rural community, changing their not changing their identity, but making their identity associated more as a place to come to, a place to visit, and a really an area that is very desirable. But to be able to do all of that, to get away from just a exit, they want to call it timber town. They needed to be able to develop that out. So they had a vision, and within that vision, we helped fund that in terms of developing a planning and rural investment strategy. That helped out in terms of realizing these are the types of things that they need, this is how much it's going to cost, and that included the broadband part as well. That helped them compete for funding, including the Reconnect Fund. So they were able to get $6 million region-wide, and wasn't just for the city of John Day, as well as other types of support and funding from other organizations and agencies, not just for broadband development. And now they are actually coming back to us to do some other broadband support internally. But again, this is an opportunity in regards to our part as a small federal agency that does not have broadband specific programs, partnering and working with our other agencies and organizations to help communities be able to support their broadband efforts. And that's my last slide. I know we're running late. Next slide, and that will show my contact, but most important, I've got Carlene Herring's name here. Carlene Herring is your field rep, our EDR Economic Development representative. She would be your go-to person. She is fantastic. She lives in Idaho. She's been in Idaho, I don't know, Carlene, you're on the line, 30 plus 40, I don't know how many years, but she is She's wonderful to work with. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, but definitely Carlene's contact is there, and she's your go-to gal. And with that, I know we are over time. I want to thank everybody and send it, I guess, going back to either Angela or Dorian.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francis. That was fantastic. And I appreciate that you highlighted John Day there, their city manager, Nick Green, and I had some really interesting discussions, and I'm hopeful when things settle down a little bit, we'll actually be able to get him out here to talk a little bit more in depth with our communities about some of the strategies that they've used.
Nick Green is a great speaker, so be sure to use him. He's wonderful.
Absolutely. So we are a little bit late on time here, but I want to make sure that we spend some time answering any questions that we might have for both John or for Francis or for any of our speakers today. And as you're dropping those questions in the chat, we also have kind of a poll question just to encourage you to think a little bit about the time frame of the economic boost and the job creation for broadband buildouts. And as Francis mentioned, sometimes if we're thinking about it in terms of job creation, maybe that time frame is a little bit longer, or maybe you think it's shorter. So go ahead and drop your answer in the chat as well too, whether or not you think it's short time frame, as in a 1 to 2 year return on investment, medium 2 to 5 years, or 5 years and up. So we'll do that. And again, go ahead and stick those questions in there. And before we lose it, I do want to make sure we return back here. Jerry, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Jerry, would you mind expanding a little bit on your comment about using the broadband tax credit?
Sure. So the state of Idaho offers a 3% tax credit for companies who purchase and install broadband equipment. The credit caps out at $750,000, and it can be used alongside some of the programs you heard about this morning, especially the loan programs, where an ISP who's taking out a low interest loan from one of these entities can then go ahead and claim the credit in addition to the low interest loan that they're getting. And depending on what the interest rate is, it's essentially taking a 3% loan and making it a 0% loan. Or, depending on how you configure the time value of money, you take the credit now and you're paying off the interest over time. So, there's some creative ways that tax credit can be used. That tax credit is also transferable. So if an ISP doing the project has already capped out their tax credits for the year, for the next couple of years, they can transfer that to another taxpayer who can then take advantage of that credit. So.
Awesome. That's great information. All right. Did we have any other questions at this time for John or for Francis or for Scott? All right.
So I wanted to tell you about the worksheet that we hope that you'll consider for our upcoming technical assistance session. And we were thinking it was time to think about your elevator pitch. I'm not sure if you've done an elevator pitch before, but the old concept of an elevator pitch is it's how you pitch your project when you're riding down in an elevator. So you're thinking about your 30-second run through of your project. Since we're never in an elevator anymore, I've heard that the new version of an elevator pitch is how you pitch your project on Twitter. So you maybe get 75 words at most to pitch your project, but it's basically a real quick summary. I talked to Russ Elliott, who includes an elevator pitch as part of his broadband planning layout. He's the state broadband director for the state of Washington, and he describes it as making sure that your mission is the loudest voice in the room. That people kind of, when you're around, that they really understand and know what your mission is. And so the basics of an elevator pitch are to state your problem, to present the solution, to explain kind of why people should trust you or trust that your plan is a good plan, to describe the value proposition, and to lead with a call to action. But really, when you're talking about broadband, it's really about presenting a compelling vision for the future. Why is this going to make a difference? Why is this worth the kind of investment you want? And then being very concrete about what kind of specific change it's going to create in your community, but still being very short. When I did a little research, and when I've done this before, it's also practice your elevator pitch out loud, and make sure when you pitch it to somebody, you should have a call to action, but if you don't get the response you want, look for some response. So if you don't get the funding you want, maybe ask for a referral or advice or suggested next steps or feedback. So if you're pitching it to your funder or your philanthropist or to John Holman, if John says, oh, well, this isn't the right grant program for you, or Scott says, oh, this isn't the right grant program for you, then say, well, which one should I look at? Or which one can I consider? So look for a next step either way. So that's what we're suggesting. And the reason that we put this at this stage in our program is because we've already talked about community priorities. We've talked a little bit about, building your case in the data. We've talked about technology. We've kind of hinted about inclusion, which we'll talk about next time. And we know that you kind of have your plan together. And we also have heard that people are tired of talking and they want to move into action. And so they really want that pitch to have that call to action. And so they want that tight pitch to move into action. And so that's why this is the exercise for our next session.
And if I can add, Karen, just to build on that in our final 30 seconds, this is not just an action or an activity for a funder or an investor. This is also the amount of time you would have with a local government leader, a local politician. You only have a short amount of time to make the case to garner and attract their attention. So this would be, you have 30 seconds to talk to your local mayor and you want to grab that attention. This exercise will help you in that 30-second pitch of how you get that follow-up action and then ultimately get that project, that action on a radar screen that will lead to some positive outcome. So again, we've elevated this and presented this to elevator pitch for a funder or investor or a service provider, but it's also applicable to Chamber of Commerce, also applicable to a local politician, state politician as well.
City council, yeah.
So thank you.
Next slide. When are we going to do this?
Wonderful. All right. So we are doing this on Thursday, January 28th. And we're going to have our technical assistance discussions. And in addition to kind of recapping what we learned today, we will be talking about our elevator pitches and hopefully give some of you the chance to test your elevator pitch out on us, and we can workshop those together and maybe even talk about as a region what our elevator pitch might be. Exciting stuff. So if you are a North Central Idaho stakeholder, please plan to join us at 9 a.m. If you are a North Idaho stakeholder, please plan to join us at 10 a.m. And as always, you are welcome to switch and swap whichever one best fits your schedule there. We will be sending follow-up information, including a link to the recording of this webinar, the full slide deck, and all the resources mentioned by our fantastic speakers and dropped in the chat today. Look for that in your email inbox either today or tomorrow. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to Sita or Pac. And if you have some follow-up questions for any of our speakers, please send those along as well, and we will make sure that they get to the right place and get answered, and the answer gets back to all of us. So with that, I think the final thing left to do is to offer a very sincere thank you to all of you for taking the time today, and to all of our funding agencies who worked through various power outages and windstorms and general chaos to put together their presentations for us today and did a fantastic job. This was such a valuable opportunity for all of us, and we appreciate it very much. And I'll make sure I'll leave Broadband USA's contact information up there, as they are, as always, our technical assistance gurus.
Thank you very much, Angie, and everybody else.